Well, Sam Greene is a professor of Russian politics, author and director of the Russia Institute at King's College London, but he joins us from Durham, North Carolina by Skype. So no breakthrough from this telephone call between the two leaders, but does it perhaps demonstrate enough of a commitment to diplomacy to delay or perhaps avoid conflict for now?
Well, I think that's the hope, and I think to a certain extent that's what both sides are projecting. I mean, Moscow does keep saying, we heard Putin say it today, we heard Lavrov say it earlier, that the United States and others are not responding to their concerns. In fact, the United States has rejected the core of Russia's demands, which is an end to NATO's open door policy and a guarantee that Ukraine and other post-Soviet states will never join the alliance. Moscow is choosing to interpret that as a non-answer, or to say that the U.S. is ignoring its concerns and not replying, and that does leave the door open for discussions. And I think the hope on all sides is that as long as people are talking to each other, they're not shooting at each other.
Russia has rejected claims of an imminent attack, hasn't it? And President Putin's foreign policy advisor said that it's absurd and unprecedented hysteria. That doesn't sound like a country that's on the brink of waging war.
No, and they're clearly trying to maintain some degree of plausible deniability, but there also isn't a great explanation for why there are something like 130,000 troops along Ukraine's border. Yes, Russia has the right to move troops within its own territory, although it does have certain obligations under the OSCE to notify its Western quote-unquote partners about that. I suppose, maybe Russia has no other space within which it could move these troops around. But this is the largest military buildup in Europe since the end of World War II by most counts, right? And so it rightly is going to have people very, very nervous. And frankly, it is only because those troops are along the border that Putin is having now almost daily conversations with Western leaders, whether it's Biden or Macron or Olaf Scholz coming to Moscow in the near future. Liz Truss was in Moscow the other day, right? That would not be happening if those troops were not stationed where they are.
And what is interesting is that despite the military presence that Russia currently has around Ukraine, it's actually the remarks from Washington and the warnings coming from Washington that are much more robust, because it seems to be a very different tone coming from the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. He is calling for cooler heads to prevail. Seems to suggest that some of this rhetoric is quite reckless.
Well, I think there are some valid questions. Obviously, I haven't seen the intelligence that the U.S. says that they have. It's very hard to evaluate where that might be coming from or whether it's reliable. I mean, the perspectives are different, right? The reality for Ukrainians is that they have been at war one way or another with Russia since 2014. And so what's on the table for them is not something new. It's a continuation of something they've been dealing with for quite some time. It looks and feels new to those of us in the West in a very different way than it does in Ukraine. But I think there's also a certain amount of pressure that Biden and other Western leaders are trying to keep on Putin in order to de-escalate, right? There is a willingness to continue these strategic dialogues and these conversations and to explore areas where there might be compromise that would increase Russia's sense of security. But they don't want Russia to continue to hold Ukraine hostage as those conversations continue. And so I think making it clear that there will be some escalation from the Western side as well potentially put some pressure on Moscow to de-escalate, although it is, as you report.
Indeed. I mean, isn't the obvious compromise to have some sort of moratorium on NATO enlargement, perhaps just for a short period of time?
Well, I mean, that might be something that could be discussed. It's something that Western leaders don't really want to put on the table, certainly when they feel like they have a gun held to their heads or to the heads of Ukraine. On the other hand, Putin has been very clear that that's not the kind of promise that he thinks would be worth the paper that it's written on. And frankly, I think it would be very difficult politically for most Western governments to make that promise in a way that would be convincing, right? It would require, for example, probably getting the permission of the United States Senate, which is something that Joe Biden would have great difficulty doing. There's not a lot of political appetite for that in most Western capitals, frankly.
Sam Greene, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.